Imagine waking up tomorrow and the heat is gone. No thermostat, no thick blanket, no warm food arriving at your door, no walls quietly protecting you from the outside world. Just you, the cold air, and the slow realization that your body is not built for this. At first, it feels like an inconvenience. Something broke. Someone should fix it. Maybe the power will come back. Maybe the temperature will rise. But now imagine it does not. Imagine this is not one bad morning. This is the world, and it stays that way for thousands of years. That was the reality facing ancient humans during the Ice Age. Not a weekend survival challenge. Not a camping trip. Not a dramatic adventure where someone chooses discomfort and then goes home. This was home. A world where winter was not just cold. Winter was an enemy that returned every year, stayed too long, and punished every mistake. Around 20,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, the planet was roughly 6 degrees Celsius colder than it is today. 6 degrees does not sound terrifying. You lose 6 degrees in a room, and maybe you put on a hoodie. But across a planet, 6 degrees can change everything. It can turn open land into frozen ground. It can push forests away. It can lock water into giant ice sheets. It can make a place like London disappear beneath ice thick enough to bury a modern city. Large parts of North America, Europe, and Asia were covered by massive glaciers. The map of the world looked wrong to modern eyes. Sea levels were around 120 meters lower than today, because so much water was trapped as ice. Britain was not an island in the same way you know it now. It was connected to continental Europe. Siberia and Alaska were joined by a vast land bridge called Beringia. Entire landscapes that people once walked across are now hidden under the ocean. So, when you picture ancient humans, do not imagine them wandering through a slightly colder version of our world. They were living on a different planet. A colder planet. A wieder planet. A planet with more exposed land, harsher wind, longer winters, and fewer chances to be wrong. And they were not alone. The landscape was filled with animals that seem almost unreal now. Woolly mammoths moved across the frozen steppe. Cave bears sheltered in the dark. Woolly rhinoceroses pushed through the cold. Cave lions, larger than modern African lions, hunted in the same world humans were trying to survive. Irish elk carried antlers spreading more than 3.5 meters across. To you, these animals sound prehistoric, almost mythological. To ancient human, they were Tuesday. And that is the first strange thing about this world. The same animals that could kill you were also the animals that could keep you alive. A mammoth was danger, but it was also meat, fat, hide, bone, tools, shelter, fuel, clothing, and weeks of survival if your group knew what to do with it. A dead animal was not just food. It was a temporary victory over winter. But victory was never guaranteed. Because your body had a problem. You are not covered in thick fur. You do not have the insulation of a mammoth, the strength of a bear, or the cold-adapted body of an Ice Age predator. Biologically, you are a strange, exposed primate with soft skin, limited natural protection, and a brain that demands enormous energy just to keep running. In freezing conditions, an unprotected human body loses heat fast. Too fast. And once your core temperature begins to fall, survival stops being heroic. It becomes mechanical. Your thinking slows. Your hands stop obeying you. Simple decisions become harder. Then the cold does what predators do not need to. It waits. So the real mystery is not that the Ice Age was dangerous. The mystery is that humans survived it at all. How does a nearly hairless ape walk into a frozen world filled with giant animals, starving winters, deadly wind, and shifting landscapes, and not disappear? The easy answer is fire. But that answer is too small. Because fire was not just warmth, it was the beginning of a survival system. And once you understand that, the Ice Age stops looking like a story about humans enduring nature. It becomes something stranger. A story about humans learning how to outthink a season before it arrived. Fire was the first answer. But it was never just a flame. To you, fire might mean comfort, a fireplace, a stove, a little circle of warmth in the dark. To an Ice Age human, fire was the difference between a body that could keep functioning and a body that quietly began to fail. It warmed the shelter. It dried wet hides. It pushed predators back from the edge of the camp. It turned darkness into usable time. But the deeper power of fire was not heat. It changed food. Raw meat gives energy. Cooked meat gives more. Once food is cooked, your body spends less effort breaking it down, and more of its energy becomes available to you. In a world where every calorie mattered, that was not a small advantage. That was survival math. Fire also hardened wooden spear tips. It made tools better. It made nights longer in a useful way. Because people could gather around it, repair things, teach children, tell stories, and pass on knowledge when the outside world was too dangerous to enter. So a campfire was not just a campfire. It was a kitchen, a heater, a workshop, a warning signal, a classroom, and a shield. And if that fire went out during a storm, the strongest hunter in the group might not be the most important person anymore. The most important person might be the one who knew how to bring the flame back. But warmth alone was not enough. You also needed walls. If there was a cave nearby, that helped. A deep cave could hold a more stable temperature than the outside world, often around 10 to 13 degrees Celsius. Not warm, but in a glacial winter, not warm could still mean alive. The cave blocked wind. The fire held heat. The group shared space. And slowly, a hole in the earth became something closer to a home. Archaeological sites show that these shelters were not random piles of people hiding from weather. They had fire pits lined with stone, sleeping areas, tool-making zones, places where food was prepared or stored. This was not panic. This was planning. And when caves were not available, humans built their own shelters out of the materials the Ice Age gave them. In parts of Eastern Europe and Siberia, archaeologists have found circular structures made from mammoth bones and tusks. At Mezherik in Ukraine, some date back around 15,000 years. Think about what that means. No timber yard, no nails, no metal frame, no modern tools, just bone, hide, stone, rope-like bendings, and a group of people who understood structure well enough to make the wind stay outside. Femurs became supports, tusks became beams, hides became walls. The body of a dead animal became architecture, and the animal gave more than shelter. It gave clothing, because biologically, you are not made for cold. You are a nearly hairless primate trying to survive in a world built for fur, fat, and winter bodies. So humans had to manufacture the insulation evolution did not give them by around 170,000 years ago. Evidence from body lice suggests humans were regularly wearing clothing. By the Upper Paleolithic, the technology had become astonishingly precise. Bone needles from Europe and Siberia were so fine that some had eyes barely a millimeter wide. That means people were not just wrapping themselves in skins. They were sewing. At Sungir in Russia, around 34,000 years ago. Buried children were found with thousands of carved ivory beads that had once been sewn into clothing. Reconstructed garments suggest layers, one close to the skin, one to trap warmth, and one tougher outer layer against wind and moisture. That is almost the same basic logic used by modern cold weather clothing. Only they reached it without science textbooks. They reached it because winter punished mistakes. And then came the hardest problem of all: food. In deep cold, hunger is not just hunger. Hunger becomes cold. Your body burns energy to stay warm. And if the energy is not there, your mind slows, your hands weaken, and bad decisions become easier. That is why fat mattered so much. A mammoth could provide meat, hide, bone, and perhaps hundreds of thousands of calories. But after the hunt came the real question. How do you store that much food with no refrigerator? You use the world itself. In frozen ground, humans could cache meat in natural cold storage. They could dry thin strips over fire or in cold winter air. They could render fat and store it in animal containers. They may even have made something like an Ice Age energy bar. Dried meat crushed and mixed with fat. The point is simple. They were not surviving one day at a time. They were building systems before the worst days arrived. But none of this worked if you were alone. That is the part modern survival stories usually get wrong. We like the image of the lone human against nature. One person, one knife, one fire, one dramatic battle with the wilderness. Ice Age humans did not survive that way. They survived because they were not alone. A small group could do what one body could not. One person might know how to track animals across frozen ground. Another might know how to butcher a large carcass so nothing useful was wasted. Someone else knew where roots could still be found beneath snow. An elder might remember a winter from 15 years earlier, when the herds vanished from one valley but returned to another. That memory mattered. In a world without written maps, books, forecasts, or calendars, old people were not extra mouths to feed. They were living archives. The woman who knew every plant within 100 kilometers was not a burden. She was a library. And winter was when that library spoke. When the outside world became too dangerous, people gathered around fire. They repaired tools. They made clothing. They taught children. They told stories that were not just stories. A story could tell you where the reindeer cross, which valley holds shelter from wind, which animal is worth following, which mistake got someone killed before you were born. Knowledge had to survive the winter too, because if the group forgot, the group died. And sometimes, surviving winter did not mean staying in one place. It meant leaving before the worst part arrived. Reindeer migrate. Bison move. Salmon appear in huge numbers only at certain times and places. If the animals moved, humans had to understand the rhythm of that movement. This was not wandering. It was strategy. Archaeologists have found stone tools made from rock carried across hundreds of kilometers. That means these people were moving between known places, along routes they understood. Through landscapes they could hold inside their minds. They knew where they were going. They knew when to return. They knew that survival was not only about the place you were standing in, but the place you would need to reach months from now. That is the deeper pattern. Fire, clothing, shelters, food caches, migration route, stories, rituals. All of them come from the same human ability. You can imagine a problem before it arrives. You can feel the shape of a future danger. Then you can prepare. A bison does not sit in autumn and think, "This winter may be worse than the last one. I should change the plan." A human can? And a human can tell the group why. That ability may be the real technology of the Ice Age. Even cave art may belong to that system. The paintings at Lascaux, Chauvet, and Altamira are often described as art, symbolism, or spiritual life. They may have been all of those things, but they may also have stored information. What animals looked like, how they moved, which bodies mattered, which patterns needed to be remembered. A wall of stone became memory. A painting became survival knowledge that could outlive the person who made it. And then there was the hardest winter problem of all. Not cold, not hunger, the group itself, long darkness, limited food, constant stress, people trapped close together, knowing that not everyone may reach spring. That kind of pressure can break a community from the inside. So humans built more than shelters. They built culture, rituals, music, shared ceremonies. Bone flutes, dating back around 40,000 years, suggest that people were not only trying to stay alive physically, they were trying to keep the group whole. Because a group that stays together can make it through the dark months. A group that fractures is already losing. So the final answer is not that humans survived the Ice Age because they were stronger than nature. They were not. They survived because they learned to think ahead, remember together, and turn weakness into systems. Today, we call the result civilization. Heating, supermarkets, waterproof jackets, food at midnight. But beneath all of it, the old logic is still there. Keep the body warm. Store energy before hunger arrives. Protect the group. Remember what the dead season did last time. The Ice Age did not just create survivors. It shaped a mind that could look into the future. See winter coming, and begin preparing before the first snow fell.